The Commodore Amiga in 1987 was in every sense a new frontier. It had all the freedom and adventurousness of the Wild West, and just as much nothingness in terms of software. Honestly, it might be better to describe the first 2 years of the Amiga as a barren wasteland, really. Much of this platform's early infrastructure had to be built by its users themselves, most of whom were aspiring yet amateur coders. The Amiga's predecessor, the Commodore 64, had its own superstar celebrity coder, UK-born Jeff Minter. Now, I have to do a small check here, because in most circles that I go in, Jeff Minter is a household name, and if you never heard of Jeff Minter, we need to talk about Jeff Minter. Everybody who was using computers in the 80s knows who he is, and the respect he gained from people, including me, is boundless. Jeff Minter was a prolific game coder for the ZX and Commodore computers, noted for deeply creative elements within his game's visual design, especially the use of intense psychedelic colors that often could border on causing epilepsy. This shit rules. Minter had some wicked games like Grid Runner, Attack of the Mutant Camels, and its sequel, Revenge of the Mutant Camels, all published under his own publishing brand, Lamasoft. Jeff really had a love for weird and eccentric animals, and he often loved placing them in sci-fi game settings. He was a titan of indie game development, and I think his great spirit lives on in places like Newgrounds and Itch.io. Basically, he was the 1980s Toby Fox. He's a captivating figure, and just the smallest exposure to his work will make you want to immediately code something yourself. And one such fan was the West German-born Karsten Nobarski. Karsten Nobarski wanted to get into game and software development, and he wanted to tread a path that Minter hadn't done before. The Commodore Amiga was fresh, new, and promising with novel possibilities, and it was absolutely hungry for coders. And while Jeff Minter was slow to transition to the Amiga, Nobarski saw the opportunity to get in the Amiga scene and carve his own reputation. It could be his turf. But mainly as a composer, which was ironic because, as Nobarski would say, he was never really a classically trained musician himself, but he did make synthesizer music as a hobby, and he had a Yamaha DX. His musical inspirations included Queen, Genesis, Electric Light Orchestra, and Jean-Michel Jarre, and he would later admit to becoming a fan of the Backstreet Boys, Shaggy, and Sash. In 1987, he was one of the two people working on Amigas, which was an Arkanoid clone. Guido Bartels would work the graphics and the coding, and all Nobarski had to supply would be the music and sound effects. Now, when it came to developing music for the Amiga, Nobarski came across what he viewed as many really frustrating hurdles. For one thing, many of the official music-making software on the Amiga were, to him, deeply inadequate. One, their interfaces followed classical music notation, and for anyone who hasn't been to a music academy, they can be really intimidating and obtuse. And two, the samples they used just didn't sound that good. They sounded like cheap knockoffs of chiptunes from the previous generation computers, and everybody knew the Amiga was capable of so much more. If you recall, the Amiga's Power Sound chip is capable of playing PCM audio, or in layman's terms, literal audio samples and recordings, like in modern waveform and MP3 files. In my Tech video, you've seen that the Amiga is capable of playing entire clips of then current pop songs, and this was one of the many things that made the Amiga special. At most, these clips can only play an audio sample of up to around 15-second length, due to various memory constraints, which is why many of the pop songs shared on diskette through the Amiga had to be carefully arranged so as to loop seamlessly, usually in the verse of the chorus. But this was really disappointing to Nobarski, and he didn't want to rely on short snippets of songs to make the music he wants to make. So instead he had a different idea. He would reduce the samples only to a single note of every instrument, and then use them to arrange music. This is basically already the working principle of the existing Amiga music software like Sonix and the Deluxe Music Construction Set, except Nobarski wanted to make and add his own samples, ones that don't suck, and samples that will actually be kind of outlandish compared to what Sonix and Music Construction Set were doing. Now, the prevailing phenomenon in electronic music of the 1980s was that it was easier than ever to make keyboards and sequencers play your own samples.
Temptation.
This is the decade that gave us house, techno, and electro.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. Now I'm going to talk into the sampler right here. Work your body. And then we can play it from the keyboard. It stays into the sampler and I can play it on the keyboard up and down the scale. Work your body, work your body. You can have a fast or a slow effect. Like the Chipmunks, you know, or... Then I'll bring in the percussion. high congas, low congas. So
And all of those genres made liberal use of samples supplied and curated by the users themselves. The Fairlight synthesizer did just that, and before that you had the same thing in the 1960s keyboard, the Mellotron. The Mellotron was famous in that every single key corresponded to one looping analog tape it could play, and the samples supplied with it could play anything from a free violin triad to a flute, church organ, an 8-person choir, and even some wacky stuff like a Dixieland rhythm section. Like, if you're a classic rock fan, you definitely remember these samples, since they were widely used by all the psychedelic and progressive rock groups of the 60s and 70s, like the Beatles, the Zombies, King Crimson, Genesis, Led Zeppelin. So there was already much of a historical precedence for Obarski to become an architect of such a music-making program, and fueling his inspiration was just one final piece of the puzzle. On the Commodore 64, you had Sound Monitor. Another independently made music-making software by the one and only Chris Hülsbeck, who made the music for Turrican and the Great Giana Sisters. Chris was another one of those coding figures that Obarski deeply respected. The Sound Monitor was ugly as sin and is less readable than an accounting spreadsheet, but what it lacks in looks, it makes up for functionality. In it, you can see 3 columns, each representing one of the C64's 3 SID chip channels, and it houses within them musical notation and instructions. It's like being able to peek inside an interactive music box. And this will be the core template that Karsten Obarski will wish to build upon. How did you exactly learn to compose? Like, who were the great ones that you kind of learned your chops from?
So, it's a tough one because, my earliest, I always say this, my earliest influence of music of all time would be Martin Galway with his soundtrack to Parallax on the C64, which is... I'd never heard anything because I was into synthesizer music, Jean-Michel Jarre and stuff. I must have been about, I was very young. Very young, had a Commodore 64, and this tune came on when I loaded the game up, and I listened to the whole thing. I was just like transfixed as a child. Like, this thing's so bloody hypnotic. And I listened to the whole thing for like 10 minutes, and it absolutely blew my mind. And I think that's kind of one of those turning points where you hear something, you're like, oh well, okay, so music can be like that. I kind of grew up through like rave music and all that kind of stuff into like, late 80s, early 90s as well. Everyone will cite the Prodigy as an influence really, but it's quite important really, isn't it? Like, you could write a tune and people say, well, that sounds very much like the Prodigy. So, well, I've just got like some nasty bass and a breakbeat, but there we go. Guys, I was really influenced by as well, like Jeff Mills and Adam Beyer. They were great artists.
And so, in December 1987, the world witnessed the birth of the Ultimate Sound Tracker, version 1.27, the first of a kind of software that would popularly get to be called music trackers. It was published in a box with a manual and 2 diskettes, labelled ST00 and ST01, with the actual program being contained in the first one, ST00. Now, those of you who were on the internet for a long time are probably familiar with the gaming YouTuber Ahoy, who already did such brilliant coverage of the tracker software and the scene that grew around it. His video, Trackers, The Sound of 16-Bit, is in my eyes one of the big milestones of long-form YouTube, and I strongly advise you take a look at it, either before or after you finish this video. Like, pause it right now if you want to. My large assumption is that everybody has already seen it, and maybe several other great videos on trackers too, like those made from Ida Diaz, Rob Smith Dev, Debug Live. So I really don't want to spend too much of my time here reinventing the wheel. Instead, I want to see if I can focus more on the first iteration of Sound Tracker, as well as some of the finer points of the functionality of tracker software. That's why for the past 2 months I had to make myself learn how to use a tracker. That background music you're hearing right now, I made it. What I'm using here is Pro Tracker 2, one of the many Sound Tracker clones because it has been ported onto Windows. Like many people, I thought this user interface looks intimidating, but once you get to know just a few basic concepts, I swear that trackers are going to be some of the most accessible music making software you've ever seen. Like digital audio workstation, DAWs, I have a hard time understanding, and I swear that Pro Tracker is going to be 5 times easier to use than any DAW you try. First, we need to establish a few key concepts. Musical notes in the Amiga can only have a range of 3 octaves, going from C1 at the lowest to B3 at the highest. You can play any of these notes if you pretend that certain rows of keys on your keyboard are like a keyboard instrument. The lower octave can be played with the keys Z to M. I'm gonna fiddle with them right now. With the leftmost key representing the C tone, the next one representing the D tone, and so on. The next higher octave goes from the Q key in the QWERTY row. And if you need to reach the 3rd octave, you would have to press F2, which transposes both of these octaves for 1 octave higher, which means that with QWERTY, you can now reach the 3rd octave. You can press F1 to get back to the lower transposition. Now, these sets of keys only play whole tones on the C major scale, aka they are perfectly analogous to the white keys on a piano. If you want to play semitones, the black keys, then they are placed right above the whole tone rows on the keyboard, meaning they're in the rows A to J, and rows 1 to 7. So you can play with these notes now, but that doesn't do anything, and that's where you need to toggle the edit mode on, so you can actually write these notes in the fields below. All you have to do is press spacebar, and the cursor will turn to blue, indicating that now you're in edit mode, meaning that now every note you play will be recorded by the software. The Sound Tracker has 4 visual fields, each corresponding to one of the Polar chip's 4 channels. Obarski went ahead to label them as melody, accompaniment, bass, and percussion. But these are just written suggestions and do not necessitate the user to place his samples in them in the intended way at all. Now that the edit mode is on, I can go ahead and punch in a few notes, and then you can press spacebar again to exit edit mode. Now, these weird digits are the source of much confusion for first-time tracker users, but once you know how to read them, they really won't seem as frightening. The first 3 digits here just represent the pitches. There's C of the 1st octave, C of the 2nd octave, and C of the 3rd octave. And here's D, and E. And if you're looking for semitones, you're going to get a sharp sign between the notes and the octave number. The next several digits, 4 in the original edition of Sound Tracker and 5 in clones such as Pro Tracker, are all zeros here. They start out as zeros, but can have different numbers depending on how you want to affect the notes. The important thing to know here is that every single digit here is hexadecimal, meaning that every one of them can have 16 different values, instead of the usual 10 we use in our base 10 arithmetic. These values are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, and F, F being the highest value. Of these digits, the first one represents the sample ID, and it is very important. Samples in a song can only be assigned to a unique ID, and this is impossible to change without messing up the entire composition. The value 0 means no sample, but all the values from 1 to F can instead be assigned to a sample, meaning that in total, any Amiga Tracker song can only have a maximum of 15 sound samples, meaning you have to be very careful and observant before deciding on a set of 15 sounds to all be used in your song. But if you're just starting, the likelihood is, at the beginning at least, that you won't need all of them. For example, Karsten Obarski's first song on the Sound Tracker, the Omegas title track, contains only 11 samples. 4 of those samples are various forms of percussion, and the remaining 7 are varied in their use, but I think I would say they are 4 melody notes, 2 accompaniments, and 1 bass note. My song, Angels Prefer Peas, only uses 5 samples. That's 3 percussions, 1 melody, and 1 bass. Because I wanted to sound out small and simple. My bass note uses sample ID1, while my melody, a string sample, uses ID2. That's all well and good, except samples aren't actually loaded with the program itself, and you had to load them yourself. So where, oh where, will you find some samples to put into this? Don't you worry, because the basket's got you covered, and that's where ST01 comes in. This diskette is filled entirely with nothing but samples. 126 of them, all carefully selected and formatted by Obarski himself. It was his true passion project in all this. See, Obarski really loved synthesizers, and a big part of what motivated him to make the Soundtracker was so he could make his own personal collection of some of his favorite synthesizer tones, and share its use through the Amiga. He recorded several sounds from his own Yamaha DX, but that wasn't enough, so he also searched and scavenged through other synths, some that he had, some that belonged to his friends, and some that he just got from other Amiga software or sample compilations. The exact sources of all of the sounds of the ST01 has actually been a popular subject of mystery for the tracker community, because to this day they are trying to document where every single one of the sounds originated from. Yet to this day, this catalogue was never complete. Hell, even I made a spreadsheet trying to see how far I could go, and the answer is not really far. So right now, I'm going to play the samples contained in the ST01 disc. I won't cover all of them, it would take too long, but I will publish it in a separate video for your viewing pleasure. First come the samples from Obarski's own Yamaha DX synthesizer. We've got one sample from the Fairlight CMI. One from the Lindrum sequencer. Several from the Korg Peli 800. The Roland Juno 106. The Casio CZ 101. The FB01. The Yamaha RX-17 and RY-10. The Roland D50. The Kawai R100. The following from the Dynamic Drums data disc. And then lastly, these samples have no verifiable sources as of this time. That'll be enough. In making these samples, every single one of them was recorded and packaged at a default note of C2, that is, the note of C on the second octave. What the Amiga does in order to create different pitches is that it speeds up or slows down the playback rates of these samples. So higher pitched samples take quicker to finish, and lower pitched samples take longer to finish. Now let's get back to the digits. The last 3 digits represented an effect you wanted to give to your notes. The first of the 3 digits represented the effect type, and the number 0 also actually causes an effect, meaning there's 16 effect. And the last 2 usually was a parameter, some sort of number from the lowest to the highest value, signifying intensity. Some notable effects include 1 and 2 for portamento, aka a slide up and down. 4 for vibrato. 7 for tremolo. 6 C for volume. And F for tempo change. There are many more effects you could do here, but I just wanted to show some of the most eye-catching ones. And the number 0 is also cool because it makes the sample play a rapid arpeggio of 3 tones, aka it can make a triad, and thus chords, and only by playing it quick enough it gives the seeming impression that you're listening to chords. The other 2 numbers are used to signify how many semitones forward should the second and the third note go. So a spread of 0, 4, 7 means you could play C, E, and G, a C major triad. This is great stuff. Only keep in mind that you can still make other triads if you expand the other 2 channels, and they would also sound much fuller, but also take up more space you might use for other melodies. And here's a major and a minor triad. Lastly, the remaining core feature of the soundtrack is its pattern system. A pattern is like a single unchanging sheet of notes that you can sequence it so they repeat at certain places, similar to the verse-chorus structure in songs. So instead of writing the verse or the chorus multiple times, you can just make a single pattern to be the verse, and then set that pattern to repeat as many times as needed. At this point, I need to give proper credits to Wasp from the demo group Pacific, who made an excellent tutorial series on YouTube about how to use Pro Tracker 2, and without his guidance, I would have been completely lost. To show some guidance and an example of how this software worked, bundled in the ST00 diskette are several of Karsten Obarski's own songs that he largely made for games, including the title track for Omegas. It takes a good while for the songs to load, as it has to read from 2 disk drives, and it needs to load every individual sample one by one. The ST00 also had several song demos. Sleepwalk. The theme to the game Crystal Hammer. Hymn. Blue Song. And the theme to Rally Master. Outside this diskette, Obarski made even more music, and some of his own personal favorite tracks, as he described, are the theme music to Oil Imperium, Dieter 07. The high score scene of Future Tank, and End theme. All of these songs combine to make Soundtracker a truly brilliant piece of ingenuity. Although by itself it never really sold that well, its distribution being basically locked only to West Germany. It was taken by Amiga coders everywhere, mostly through piracy, who have all basically become the Soundtracker's admirers. This was a magical software they've been waiting for this whole time. And yet, as amazing as this software was, the first iteration of it also knew how to be incredibly fussy, much to its tragic detriment. The OG version 1.27 of Ultimate Soundtracker was super buggy. Obarski just did not put in many failsafes. You could make one wrong slip, like trying to save your work to a non-existent disk or a drive, and the whole program and the OS would crash, taking the RAM with it, meaning you would lose a lot of your precious work if you didn't properly save it. To make things worse, the Soundtracker was compatible only with one specific OS version, that being Kickstarter 1.2, and it demanded that you had a 2-disc drive setup in an era where such a thing was really expensive. It needed it because it was coded to run the program from one disc and fetch the samples from the other. That's the point of using the 2-diskette. All of this stuff deeply frustrated the user base, and frankly, they did not really have the faith or the patience that Obarski would address any of these shortcomings. So the scene thought they would have to do something about it. In his video, Ahoy wasn't kidding when he said that the Soundtracker got, quotes, outright pillaged, and it is in many respects a really sad tale. Basically, a scener by the name of The Exterminator from the Dutch group Jungle Command disassembled the Soundtracker and made a number of changes to fix the Soundtracker's various bugs. He called this version Soundtracker 2, and he then shared both it and its source code, explicitly asking everyone in the Amiga scene that, if they wanted to give more updates or install new features to the software, they're free to do so. The Soundtracker 2 was published in early 1988. Immediately after, it would be followed by the unofficial Soundtracker 3 in March 1988, Soundtracker 4 in April 1988, and many other forks, and you can see how this was starting to get out of control.
There was an Amiga magazine called Amiga Format back in the UK, and you used to get cover discs on there, so they put software or demos of games and stuff on there. And they put a copy of Med on the cover disc. Right,
they already had Med back then, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a very important distinction. Not Octamed, Med. So before Octamed, there was a version that was only 4 channels, right? That was my first experience with actually using track software and writing music. And it was just, the disc had some samples on, I wrote something terrible. But it was just incredibly fun. Like, I thought, I see, I load a sample, I play it with some notes, I key in that thing in there, and then I'd find, because I had quite a stream of public domain discs coming in, and they would have like the latest versions of whatever tracker had come out. So not obviously Soundtracker, because that's obviously a commercial product, but all the different permutations of the generational trackers after that, like Noise Tracker, Star Trekker, all these different versions were kind of coming out. So they'd come in and I'd go, well, everyone's writing their music in that, so I should probably use that instead. So I kind of gave up Med pretty quickly, and then just started using, at the time it was Noise Tracker, but I think by 91 when Pro Tracker came out, everyone had pretty much just ditched Noise Tracker because Pro Tracker was so much better. So
Obarski caught wind of this, and he wanted to fix the shortcomings of his own software. Thus he made version 2.0 of his own Soundtracker in November 1988, the real official version 2 that fixed many of the issues that he saw levied against his program. But sadly it was too little too late, since Obarski was far outclassed by quicker and more talented coders who kept iterating and reiterating on the Soundtracker to a level of perfection he could never outmatch. And so Obarski's hard work and himself were both left to languish and become forgotten in history. Nothing about this was official or intended or legal. There was really nothing he could do about this. All of these actors lived in very localized environments, there was no internet, no global reach, and so there was very little awareness of where this software came from. And it wasn't even copied out of malice, it's just kids who saw a useful tool and decided to improve it and democratize it and put it out for free. Once the first iteration was out, already the Soundtrackers 2 origins had become muddied, and nobody even knew it was a commercial software. Basically everybody who ever saw all of Soundtracker's descendants just perceived it as a free toolset made by the scene or the scene. Of course, as you'd imagine, the whole experience just made Obarski very bitter. Meanwhile, the scene coders kept reiterating on Soundtracker. A big invention made by Doc, or Dr. Mebius Orgasm Crackings, came in mid-1988, when they invented the mod file, or module. A module, basically, is a file that contains two compartments. One of it holds the song pan data, and the other one contains all the samples used within this song, their actual waveforms. And it does so in a way that is super compact, airtight, and convenient for sharing and using. Now you didn't have to load up your STO1 disk since the samples were all already loaded there, and in fact this proved to be a great way to put your own samples and share them with others, or make your own collection from the novel samples that you could find. Now you could share samples basically the same way you would trade cards or collect Pokemon, and the libraries of samples grew far beyond STO1. Obarski himself made the second sample disk, STO2. But the Amiga scene in general would make unofficial sequel discs like the ST03, ST04, and so on. Best I could find, there are 116 of these diskettes, all with wacky and wackier samples, and that truly made the tracker scene grow far beyond a miniature scope. The next tracker releases were Noise Tracker in August 1989, a variant of Soundtracker, Noise Tracker 2, Pro Tracker, which is what I'm using and which now allow you to edit and slice samples yourself, Med, Octamed, and DigiBooster. Finally, the Soundtracker got ported into Windows in the form of Screen Tracker in 1990, Fast Tracker in 1992, Impulse Tracker in 1995, and other ones like OpenMPT, Man Tracker, Milky Tracker, Cycle, Soundbox, Renoise, Fami Tracker, and so on and so on. Of all these trackers, like which one do you use right now? Or do you use several of them for very different purposes? But what's your current battle station?
I mean, my current battle station for actually writing music is Ableton, so which is it's obviously not a tracker. If I'm really honest, trackers aren't the nicest things to work with in terms of actual workflow. So, I mean, if you were to compare how quickly I could do some editing and music work in Ableton versus any tracker out there, like the time between getting an idea and getting it down is like that, where on a tracker it's more like that, well, at least for me anyway. AHX tracker as well, I don't know if you've heard of that, it's another Amiga tracker. I've done one fast tracker tune in the last 10 years, I can't remember what year it was we did it. If you look up Reclamation by Logicoma, you'll see that it's like fast tracker 2 is like a 32 channel tracker or 64, whatever, it's like far too many channels for me to deal with. And we released it at the Revision Tracks Music Compo that year, but we kind of blagged it a bit and then managed to integrate effectively a set of demo visuals into the pattern data so you could see those on the big screen during the Tracks Music competition. That's some silliness that we were up to. I guess that's kind of the demo scene all over, isn't it? It's like, well, we're not thinking about why we should be doing something. It's just like, oh, we can, so we might as well give it a try.
Do you occasionally source them from other things? Do you maybe like, pinch them for like your other tracker files?
So back in the day, if we're talking about when I was 16, 17 years old, yeah, there was a trick that we used to do where we'd load someone else's Pro Tracker module and then clear all the song data and then write a new tune with their samples, right? Right, that's back in the day. Right, haven't done that for many, many years. But as I say, because everything's in Ableton, that is effectively where all the samples come from. So for example, I'll get a synth, a VST plugin synth, and then I'll write a bass line with it. Once that composition bit's done, yes, I do have to effectively put those notes in again. But all I do is then get one long bass note, for example, and go, right, well, I'll bounce that down as a wow, and then I'll put that into Pro Tracker, and then I'll just key those notes back into the sequence that they're in. It's not like I have to rewrite it again. The part where I've had to like come up with everything and get it all working is all in a package that's got save and undo functions, which is kind of important. The process once it's in Pro Tracker, there will be a lot of other little additional edits and composition that happens only on that song. But yeah, all samples. So like, I've got obviously massive sample libraries on my machine with different drums, all sorts of different things. So I can just pull stuff up from that, and it effectively goes into the Ableton track, and then I bounce it down if I want it to Pro Tracker. So it's like basically just you exporting like a stem, and then going, well, I'll cut that bit out, and then I can play that as a note in Pro Tracker. So that's where all the samples come from. I've got a solution for that for you. If you're on Windows, that is. GitHub.com/DJH0FFMEN WAV2 Amiga. It's super simple to use. Basically, you create you select a note in Pro Tracker that you want your sample to go to. So whether it's C, C sharp, D, you have all the different notes selected there. And then you basically just drag and drop your WAV files on it, and then press the button, and then you'll put an 8-bit version of it next to your WAV files. And then you can just load those straight to Pro Tracker. There's some old sample packs from the 90s.
I
can't remember who it was who made them, but there's one of them called Jungle Warfare. But there was a company that used to make these sample packs, like audio CDs. I would just go and dig into those, because they're always, what I found about those is that there's so many different sounds on them. There's always quite a smorgasbord, like a plethora of different variations on these old 90s sample CDs. And you'll find stuff that you'll recognise from tunes that you like from the 90s.
It's crazy how many trackers there are now, and it's hard to keep track of any of them. But none of this ever deterred their use. These trackers were so wonderful and versatile, and were used by really creative people. Many PC games of the 90s used tracker music, such as Star Control 2. Some of the best tracker music you'll ever hear are made for casual games such as the best Arkanoid clone ever made, DX Ball 2, which I guess cements the fact that Arkanoid clones and tracker music history will always be intertwined. And lastly, Demoscene veterans turned game dev underdogs turned corporate overlords, Epic Mega Games, also banked hard on tracker music. In fact, it's kind of the core feature of most of their classic games, all produced by their in-house composer, the one, the only, the legendary Alexander Brandon, who fashioned the music for Jazz Jackrabbit 2, Unreal Tournament, and Deus Ex. The power of tracker music is just incredible because for such a tiny memory space and with such a tiny hand and arrangement, you can fashion such endless beauty. It really didn't stop in just video games because it was adopted by professional electronic music producers such as The Prodigy and Aphex Twin, and was even embraced by many DJs in the live DJ sets. Something that's the most astonishing, in my opinion, is that by far the biggest use of trackers fell within the jungle and drum and bass genres.
Control in Octamed back in 1989. If you take that digital output and put that to
It also happened in reverse. Jungle became the genre of choice for many tracker composers, and you could expect many of the tracker compos to feature copious amounts of armor and break. One of my good friends, Bonefish, from the demo group Reality, is so masterful at what he does, and some of the most monstrous drum and bass I've ever heard always comes from his genius.
It does very much vary. It will start with I'll just listen to a bunch of samples and it depends. Like if you take the shipping forecast, for example, when I wrote that was an idea that had been brewing in my mind for about 2 years.
Now on BBC Radio 4, it's time for the shipping forecast issued by the Met Office. The area forecasts for the next 24 hours.
I've had all of it, like, in my mind. I've already worked out what most of it's going to be like. I just need to now go and actually action this. So I have to. So I knew, like, okay, I need this foghorn sample. I need these really heavy drums. I need this really disgusting bass. Okay, they can fit all that. And like, fit all that together, and then the rest of it. I usually know kind of roughly what style I'm going to write something in. Then I'll just go and find some samples that kind of fit in that genre, and then it's usually just getting like a 4 or 8 or 16 bar loop, just running, and then like getting a beat in there. Beat's usually a good start, right? Because that's a good grounding, getting a beat in first. Because then obviously everything else you lay on top has already got a beat to complement. Whatever comes next, it's really organic. It just depends. Like, it might just be like a kind of chiptune / future garage thing not that long ago. A track called Footprints, and the whole thing started with there was just some little drums, like some little kind of burial style drums, a bit garagey, and just this one pad sound, this like kind of chorally vocal pad. I just left that running. I was like, oh yeah, no, that's great. I've got that. Everything else is just I know everything else that we need now. So yeah, it depends. It will start with one sample, or start with a drum loop. It's something as simple as that, which will then let everything else kind of propagate around it. So
I think I have to stop there. It's really hard to contain my excitement for the wealth of tracker music out there, and I've only just scratched the surface. If you want to explore tracker music yourself, the brilliant site Mod Archive hosts all kinds of mods. And it's also useful to know that the open source media player VLC also has a support for tracker music. Yeah, you can drag mod files in and they'll be able to play it no problem. But really, what I wanted to do with this video is to put a spotlight on the OG, Karsten Obarski, whose amazing program lived on within an entire underground art community for over 35 years. Obarski, though, never really dabbled in the scene, and after his work got dismantled, he didn't have the will to code or make music again, and has since moved to a quieter existence. Last we heard, today he is a humble electronics specialist and has a family, and apparently found a new passion in motorcycling. Yet I can't shake the feeling he deserves so much more. If there's any moral to the story, it's value your work. In our material world, we place a certain moral weight on all of our material measures and gains. It is just so. There are many faceless and cold-blooded economic forces who tyrannically take away from us everything that we have. It is only right that we fight against them. The cracking and computer demo scene, being new and populated basically by kids, would be the most adept at taking away from corporate powers. But in the final case of Obarski, they wouldn't know how and they weren't equipped to deal with it. And I don't blame them. Obarski's trouble was the trouble of small locality at the rapidly changing technological frontier, tragically just on the cusp of the breakthrough of the internet, yet early enough that his creation would have been bootleg. If he made the work now, I'm sure he would have gotten his laurels for it, and it is his right to do so. If anything, he did say he was aware of the impact his little program made on the world and on history. In a way, the Prodigy wouldn't have existed without him. That fills him with immense pride. And so, even if he unwittingly became a part of a scene much larger than he would have anticipated, he would be immortalized in it, and he will stay a part of its family. Much of the reading in Obarski's life has been done by the French Zina Xavier, who wrote a thorough blog series looking at the start of the soundtrack. I'm also happy to add that, just as I was finalizing this episode, a Zina called Zuperdan managed to make an updated version of ProTracker for Windows. Yeah! He calls it ZuperTracker, and it's basically the same except it has certain quality of life upgrades. You can full screen the pattern view now, it's easier to copy and paste blocks now, and now it even has a MIDI compatibility, and the jam mode. Keep your eyes out for more updates!